Yeah, what's up? What's going on? It's your man, Maniacs, back at it again with another stream, back at it again with another video. I haven't done one of these in a minute. It's been a while since we had a history stream. I apologize for that. For the people who actually do come to this channel for history, I know it's probably not that many of y'all. My history videos aren't like the most popular on the channel, but I said it's a thing that I do, and I haven't been doing it. So if you do come for that, I apologize so very much for it. And because it's our first day back, we're gonna do some Hitler stuff. Because if y'all been here, y'all been around, y'all know I am madly obsessed with World War II. I was gonna do it was something about Black Wall Street and like a Tulsa massacre or something like that. I've heard of it before, I haven't really researched it like that. So I seen it like on Twitter a couple of days ago, and I was like, oh, end of Black History Month, this could be kind of cool to get into. But I saw the channel that made the video I had saved, and I don't like that channel. It was the same channel that did the what was the other? There was another video we did, and it was more like they were reacting to a documentary, and I wasn't really on board with that. I didn't really like that, so I'm not gonna react to a reaction of a documentary. Like that's too much. So instead, we're going to do some more World War II stuff, some more Armchair Historian. If you do not subscribe to the Armchair Historian, you're missing out. It's a great channel, great diagrams, great visuals, and we're going to hop right into this. It's, if I'm not mistaken, it is the Battle of Berlin. Sorry, sped up.
It is February 1945. Soldiers of the Soviet 8th Guards Army stand in silence as they observe the rays of the morning sun glisten on the icy waters of the Oder River. Among them is the war correspondent Vasily Grossman. Vasily has covered the war since the Battle of Moscow, and like his comrades in arms, he has counted every river he has crossed since the advance westward from the Volga at Stalingrad. Now, after a hellish trek of over 3 years, he stands at the bank of the final river before Berlin, caught by the emotion of the moment.
Why?
He writes,
Мне захотелось крикнуть, позвать тех братьев-бойцов, что лежат на русской, украинской, белорусской и польской земле, спят вечным сном на поле Браницкой.
He writes,
Мне захотелось крикнуть.
I wanted to shout and call to all our brothers, our soldiers, who are lying in the Russian, Ukrainian, Belarusian, and Polish earth, who sleep over the fields of our battles. Comrades, can you hear us? We've done it. We've crossed the river.
Hi, I'm Griffin Johnson, the Armchair Historian. By early 1945, Hitler's Third Reich was on its last legs. While the Allies prepared to make a dash across the Rhine, in the east, the Red Army was advancing toward the German border at lightning speed. As its armies closed in on Berlin, its men vowed to take revenge for the death and destruction the Germans had brought upon the motherland. Hitler, however, would not go down without a fight, and forced his defeated people into one more cataclysmic bloodletting that would not end until the hammer...
Can we just talk about how insane Germany was in this time period? Like, they had just experienced hyperinflation. Their currency was in shambles. Their economy was in shambles. Everybody was broke and starving and literally crumbling from the aftermath of World War I. And then this funky dude with this funky mustache comes in, and all of a sudden they're able to fight off England. I wasn't gonna say France, but France was fucking useless. But England, the Soviet Union, and the United States. It's insanity. Insanity.
And Sickle finally flew above the Reichstag, and the Fuhrer lay dead in his underground bunker. Before we begin, I'd like to thank our partner NordVPN for sponsoring today's video. If you're like me and the communicate their stream active safe from malware and dodgyweb.com/historyvpn. 1944 had been nothing short of a disaster for the Germans on the Eastern Front. After the annihilation of Army Group Center, the seemingly unstoppable Red Army had chased the Wehrmacht to the gates of Warsaw. In the south, Romania and Bulgaria had capitulated and changed sides.
I love how they show this. What is
south, Romania and
the Kingdom of Captions? Move out the way. I guess Kingdom of Italy, but I don't know what that was called then.
Bulgaria had capitulated
Kingdom
and
of? I
changed
thought that was just
sides,
Italy.
while Hungary verged on collapse as Soviet armies laid siege to Budapest. Unwilling to admit defeat, Hitler now made the momentous decision to deploy his final armored reserves to relieve the city's defenders and secure Hungary's oil fields. This, as it turned out, was exactly what the Soviet High Command, better known as the Stavka, had hoped for. By increasing pressure on the Hungarian front, Stalin and his advisors aimed to lure the Führer into moving his vital armored reserves away from Poland. While 3 Soviet fronts, totaling some 2.5 million men, would make a dash across the Vistula River around Warsaw and drive straight toward Berlin.
2.5 million men?
Would make a dash across the Vistula River around Warsaw and
I
drive
love
straight
the
toward Berlin.
visuals. I know I said that at the
Prepare their
beginning,
men
but I
for
really
the coming
do.
struggle. Political commissars handed out instructions that echoed the overwhelming sentiment felt among the embittered Soviet soldiers. The soldier's rage in battle must be terrible. He does not merely seek to fight, he must also be the embodiment of the court of his people's justice. Fueled by a desire for revenge, Stalin's armies began breaking out of their bridgeheads on January 12th. Within days, the outgunned defenders were forced into a frenzied retreat. On the 15th, General Heinz Guderian pleaded with Hitler to send every available unit east. The Führer, in turn, made great promises in the form of 2 SS Panzer Corps recently withdrawn from the Ardennes. However, rather than arriving to salvage the situation in Poland, they were thrown into yet another one of Hitler's armored pipe dreams in Hungary. Lacking sufficient mobile reserves, the bulk of the ill-fated
Gotta say, he wasn't the best,
and destroyed.
He wasn't the best strategist.
As the catastrophe unfolded, the Berlin radio broadcasted apocalyptic news bulletins which compared the
a lot of flaws in Hitler's plans, man.
advancing Red Army to the Mongol hordes, the Huns and the Tartars, who were out to bring total destruction and the end of civilization. Driven by fear,
Das
a
der
growing mass of
Civilization.
refugees began a long, deadly march across the icy roads leading westward in hopes of eluding the jaws of Soviet vengeance. The dreaded Red Horde, however, was moving at lightning speed, and by the end of January, its armies had advanced some 500 kilometers, or nearly 311 miles to the banks of the Oder River, just 60 kilometers, or 37 miles, from Berlin. However, the rapid advance had stretched the Red Army's logistics to their limit, and heavy resistance in East Prussia had left Marshal Georgy Zhukov's flank dangerously exposed to counterattack from German troops massing in Pomerania. As a result,
I'm assuming
the
one at the top
Stavka
is
decided to
Pomerania.
halt the final assault on Berlin until the flanks were secured. By mid-April, the Red Army had reached the Oder-Neisse River line on a front that stretched from Stettin in the north to the Czech border in the south. The eyes of the world were now converging on Berlin, as Stalin's armies prepared for their final act of vengeance that would eradicate Nazi Germany once and for all. Although the Allies had promised to leave Berlin to the Red Army, the ever-paranoid Stalin
said
still
nah.
urged haste in the capture of the city. The final plan called for a 3-pronged attack on the Berlin axis to encircle and capture the city within 12 to 15 days, then move on to meet the Allies at the Elbe River. Zhukov's first Belarusian front would be at the center of the thrust, while Marshal Ivan Konev's first Ukrainian front to the south was set to attack across the Neisse River in the direction of Potsdam and Dresden. Finally, Marshal Konstantin Rokossovsky's second Belarusian front would tie down German forces to the north in the Stettin-Schwedt sector to prevent them from reinforcing Berlin.
It's crazy. If y'all remember this video that we watched a while back, the Germans had made it all the way to fucking Stalingrad, and now they got pushed back to Berlin. Like I said, it was just flaws and flaws in his military strategy. Hitler did not
become
cook.
accustomed to fighting on wide open terrain, few in the Red Army had much experience in large-scale urban street fighting.
I mean, he was
It was up to General
disgustingly
Vasily
outnumbered.
Volkov's 8th Guards Army,
I think.
veterans of the Battle of Stalingrad,
There's
to
so many
distribute
Russians in
pamphlets
the
on
world,
urban
man.
warfare, while special combined arms task forces were formed. Red Army engineers, on their part, worked day and night to construct hundreds of bridges and thousands of wooden assault boats to cross the Oder and Nysa rivers. To achieve this, Soviet planners had to find a way to move 29 armies over hundreds of kilometers to create shock groups capable of penetrating the German line in areas only 2.5 to 10 kilometers or 1.5 to 6 miles in width. When it was all said and done, the Red Army would advance on Berlin with some 2.5 million men, 6,250 tanks and self-propelled guns, and 7,500 combat aircraft. Aiming to make the invaders bleed for every inch of German soil, the Wehrmacht constructed a series of well-entrenched defensive lines which barricaded the way into Berlin. Manning these positions were the remains of Army Group Vistula and 4th Panzer Army, as well as the Berlin garrison. Combined, this force consisted of 750,000 German soldiers, supported by 1,519 tanks and assault guns,
like I was saying, disgustingly outnumbered,
and 2,200 aircraft. However, these numbers looked more impressive on paper than they did in reality, as virtually all of its formations were under strength.
Look at that.
Although many units were led by battle-hardened veterans of the Eastern Front...
Like, this is what I'm talking about, like, you're just hopelessly outnumbered, outgunned. What's that, 3 times? About 3 times the amount of men, about, like, 4 times the amount of tanks, fucking 4.5 times the amount of automated guns, and 3 times the amount of, even more than 3, like 3.5 times the amount of airplanes. They stood no chance. Soviets were going all in.
Of the Eastern Front, their rank and file was often made up of a mix of wounded.
What was Japan doing at this point? Weren't they supposed to be fighting?
From the Hitler Youth. Moreover, some
Wait, no,
60,000
Japan was
of the
on.
defenders came from
Japan was against Russia. Weren't Japan supposed to be fighting the Russians? Shouldn't be fighting a two.
Not be able to count much on its armored and air assets either, as the
a two-front war. How are they sending this many people
otherwise
at
considerable
Germany?
Force of fighting vehicles operational for any extended period of time. Morale was also at an all-time low. Most suffered from malnutrition and a lack of hygiene, and save for the most fanatical Nazis, few now believed in the promise of final victory. Even so, every effort was made to convince the men that the much-anticipated Wunderwaffen would still turn the tide of the war, and that peace with the Western Allies were soon to bear fruit. But if these motivations were only marginally effective, the widespread fear of Soviet vengeance and barbarism drove even the most cynical to continue fighting. On April 12th, the Berlin Philharmonic Orchestra gave its last performance. Among the music played was Richard Wagner's Ride of the Valkyries. 4 days later, another type of orchestra began to play as thousands of Katyusha rocket launchers and field guns of Zhukov's front opened up on the first German defensive line along the Zalo Heights. Miles away in Berlin's eastern suburbs,
just imagine an F-150 with rocket launchers on the back.
Gathered in the street to listen to the start of the coming storm. A stunned Russian engineer described the unfolding spectacle. Along the whole length of the horizon, it was bright as daylight. On the German side, everything was covered with smoke and thick foundations of earth in clumps flying up. There were huge flocks of scared birds flying around in the sky, a constant humming, thunder...
Like you're telling me, if you just come in and just bomb the living shit out of everything... I mean, I know it's the German defensive line, but like, aren't they defending cities and like strong points? They're not... You gotta be killing a bunch of civilians, destroying a bunch of infrastructure. I don't know war law like that to see how many war crimes were broken, but it had to been disgusting amount of war crimes just flying off left and right.
Explosions. We had to cover our ears to prevent our eardrums breaking. As the sound of artillery gradually faded, hundreds of men began shouting, "To Berlin," as tank engines roared and the lead assault elements began advancing toward the heights. Many of the German defenders, unfortunate enough to have been caught in the preceding onslaught, had disappeared in the blink of an eye, while dazed and panic-stricken survivors rushed back toward the second defensive line. However, the awesome bombardment obscured serious problems in Zhukov's plan. The destruction caused by the shelling had been so great in scope that it had severely worsened the condition of the terrain that his men now had to traverse. The searchlight...
Like I was talking about destroying the infrastructure. It was so bad that they couldn't even drive their fucking tanks through it. These bitches can go through the woods, and they bomb these areas so bad that you couldn't drive through it.
Intended to blind the enemy instead reflected onto the smoke-filled air and obscured the vision of the advancing infantry. In the resulting chaos, units lost contact with each other as Soviet artillery and aircraft began attacking friendly formations. Worse still, German intelligence had had prior knowledge of the coming offensive, which meant that many of the first-line troops had been evacuated to the safety of the rear. What ensued was nothing less than what a member of the Grossdeutschland Guard Regiment described as a slaughterhouse. Countless soldiers were cut down as they struggled to advance across the floodplains and through German minefields. In other sectors too, the attackers were cut down and repulsed as they attempted to cross the Oder. Sensing disaster, an increasingly agitated Zhukov ordered his 2 tank armies to attack at once. However, most of the infantry's artillery and supply vehicles were still trying to make their way to the front, causing the tank armies to become hopelessly stuck in an endless traffic jam. Even when the lead armor finally approached the heights, they found themselves ambushed by concealed 88 gun emplacements, Tiger I tanks, and infantry armed with deadly Panzerfaust recoilless anti-tank launchers. Unsurprisingly, Zhukov's decimated men had made little progress at the end of the first day, and it would take 3 more days and countless more dead before his armies finally forced their way through the final defensive line. Naturally, Stalin was infuriated, but he could rest easy in the fact that
why don't you go get out there then?
Had seen more success. By the end of April the 18th, his tank armies were across the Spree River and were racing toward Berlin. Lacking sufficient reinforcements and ammunition, the surviving defenders in both sectors were forced into a headlong retreat. With the German defensive lines in the south and in the center broken, and with vital troops in the north still tied down in heavy fighting, the road to Berlin lay open. Lacking the supplies to keep on fighting, German morale now visibly began to collapse. Thousands of encircled men surrendered, while masses of stragglers, deserters, and refugees
were they allowed to surrender
into the doomed city. All the while, an increasingly delusional Hitler continued to demand fanatical resistance until the bitter end. On April 20th, the Führer's birthday was rudely interrupted by Soviet artillery shelling Berlin's northeastern suburbs.
I was just critical of Hitler's military strategy, but I just thought about it. Like when he said he was going more and more fanatic, it just reminded me how messed up this dude was. I don't know how good your military strategy can be when you and probably all of your generals, most of your soldiers are all messed up. I know it was great for Blitzkrieg in the initial, but like once your morale is going bad, like I'm just thinking about smoking weed. If you're in a good mood and you smoke weed, you're gonna be great. But if you're down in the dumps and you get a bad high, your whole day is just ruined. So imagine being on like the losing end of a war and you're having a bad meth trip. I'm sure you're just ready to burn it all down, like send all of the guns. Because you don't think you could lose, or you think if you are going to lose, everybody's going to lose with you. Because amphetamines are crazy strong.
Zhukov and Konev's tank armies began a frantic race to the city's outskirts. In the meantime, many senior officials of the Nazi Party engaged in a similar type of competition to be the first one to get permission to flee the city. Soldiers on the ground enjoyed no such privileges, and those who tried to run or displayed signs of cowardice were summarily hanged throughout the city, with messages such as, "I was a coward," or "I was a deserter," dangling from their chests. The next morning, Soviet artillery fired a frenzied barrage into Berlin's city center, while the remains of General...
Yeah, that's what I'm talking about. There's no way there's not a bunch of civilians and non-military personnel in there.
Soviet aircraft. Other remnants of the German
in the city center of Berlin
stop Zhukov's armies from pushing into the city from the southwestern and northern flanks. However, its depleted units could only delay the enemy, and Zhukov and Konev's forces both reached the city's outskirts that evening. Believing himself to be the next Frederick the Great, Hitler remained confident that a massive counterstroke by the newly created Army Detachment Steiner and 9th Army against Zhukov's flanks would trap the invaders in the city in a ploy similar to what had befallen the Germans at Stalingrad 2 years prior. When it became clear on the following day that Steiner's army detachment lacked sufficient strength and ammunition to attack, the Führer finally cracked and openly admitted for the first time that all was hopelessly lost. With the Soviets breaking into the city, General Weidling was appointed commander of the Berlin defense area. However, by the time Weidling took command, only about 45,000 Wehrmacht and SS troops, just over 40,000 men of the Volkssturm, and a measly 60 fuel-starved tanks were left standing to defend the city against some 1.5 million Soviet troops.
What was it? 700,000 versus 2.5 million, and it ended up with 45,000 versus 1.5 in this one battle. This is, oh my gosh. This is my fascination. I was gonna say why I love, because I don't love war. War is disgusting. War is nasty. War makes my skin crawl. My fascination with World War II is that it's just like the worst humanity has ever been. Obviously, like, we act like we're more civilized than our more barbaric ancestors, but in a battle that lasted just a few months, what do you say, starting January and now we're in April, they killed 650,000 on one side and 1 million on the other side, with bombs and bombs from tanks, rocket launchers, pure starvation, hanging deserters. Like, this is the most brutal and disgusting that human beings have ever gotten. I think ever. Outside of, like, straight up cannibalism, which I'm sure there probably was a little bit, especially during Stalingrad when they were fucking dying in the winter, dying in the cold, with no supplies. I'm sure there was a little bit of cannibalism in there. But this is like the worst of humanity. This is the worst you'll ever see a person be. And it's all documented for us to just witness.
Unsurprisingly, Zhukov's armies had managed to push the defenders out.
And the worst part is, it wasn't even 100 years ago. What is it? Almost, we're getting close to like 80 years ago? Oh, this year marked 80 years since the end of World War II. It's not that long ago. And we were engaged in the most barbaric forms of warfare. Ugh. Yeah.
The eastern and southeastern suburbs by the end of the 23rd, while other fronts tightened their grasp around the city's flanks. With inevitable defeat looming on the horizon, many of the defenders began to lay down their arms. Others, however, continued to resist fanatically. At the Tempelhof airport, a mixed group of SS-led German defenders, including
still haven't said if the Soviets allowed them to surrender,
who had to resort to massive aerial and artillery bombardment to finally capture the airport a day later. By that time, the encirclement of Berlin had been completed. However, a manic Hitler promised Weidling that yet another massive counteroffensive by General Wenck's 12th Army in the southwest was sure to come to the rescue of the beleaguered defenders. Wenck, however, had no intention on embarking in a futile suicide mission, and instead moved to relieve encircled German troops further to the east. With no further hope of relief, Weidling urged the Führer to stage a breakout westward to join up with remnants of Army Group Vistula. Hitler, however, rejected the plan and restated his intention to fall at the head of his troops. During the next 3 days, the Red Army tightened its hold on Berlin as the advancing armies closed in on the inner defensive line, protecting the governmental district. The lack of clear demarcation lines between the fronts, however, led to various...
I wonder if there are pictures of what Berlin looked like after this.
Confused in the ensuing quagmire. After careful deliberation, it was decided that most of Konev's frustrated men were to be redeployed to Czechoslovakia, while Zhukov was to go in for the final kill. By the end of the 29th, the 8th Guards Army had blasted its way through the heavily defended Tiergarten sector, while the 3rd Shock Army had crossed the Spree over the Moltke Bridge just to the north. In front of them lay the ultimate prize, the blackened walls of the Reichstag, the former parliamentary building widely regarded as the symbolic heart of the Third Reich. Capturing it would be nothing less than the culmination of the entire
there's no
Soviet
crazy
war effort.
pictures.
The defense of the building and its surroundings was led by a determined group of...
Large parts of the city were in ruin. After the war ends on May 8th, 1945, much of Berlin is nothing but rubble. 600,000 apartments have been destroyed, and only 2.8 million of the city's original 4.3 million still live. Only 2.8 million of the city's original population of 4.3 still live. Insanity. That's fighters with little less to insane. Lose.
In the morning of the following day, Soviet artillery opened.
That's not combatants.
Assault troops rushed forward.
That's combatants, civilians, women, children, all of that.
Proceeded to clear the building in brutal close quarters combat. After hours of bitter fighting, the red banner was spotted hanging from the second floor at around 2:30 p.m. But it wouldn't be until late in the evening before a path to the roof had finally been cleared. Two sergeants, identified as Mikhail Yegorov and Meliton Kantaria, managed to reach the top and hoisted the hammer and sickle on top of the Reichstag, marking the symbolic end of Hitler's Third Reich. As this historic moment unfolded, an even more momentous event occurred barely a kilometer away. With Soviet troops converging on his bunker complex, the embittered Führer knew that he had reached the end of the line. The German people had failed him and his vision of a 1,000-year Reich. After giving Weidling the go-ahead to attempt a belated breakout, the Führer said his farewells to his remaining staff, poisoned his dog Blondie, and retired to his study room to commit suicide together with his newly wedded bride, Eva Braun.
Imagine if Hitler wasn't a genocidal maniac and did accomplish the 1,000-year plan. Because, like I said, Germany was super impoverished after World War I. Got their shit together. Pretty sure they became impoverished again after World War II. Just imagine if they didn't, start a world war. Imagine how advanced they would be. Because they're already, they're good now. Like, they're not a superpower. They're not too far behind. If they didn't, get the entire world against them, just imagine how advanced they would be. Or in 1,000 years, they're all going to be run by the unigovernment AI. But if they didn't, I think Germany would be on the fast track. If they had Hitler's domestic policies and just kept him out of foreign affairs, Germany would probably be on top. I'm not gonna lie.
Hitler's death did not put an immediate end to the fighting. The new chancellor, Joseph Goebbels, rejected Stalin's demand for an unconditional surrender of the garrison, prompting the Red Army to blast the remaining German positions until the defense was reduced to little more than a few isolated pockets. With Goebbels' subsequent suicide being announced that night, the door to peace in Berlin could finally be opened. At 6 a.m. on May 2nd, General Weidling officially ordered his remaining men to lay down their arms. When the guns finally fell silent in the afternoon, an eerie silence descended on the city of which Troikov would later write, "The flame of World War was quenched there, whence it arose." Although fighting in Europe would continue until Germany's unconditional surrender on May 8th, the war had come to a climax at the Battle of Berlin. The capture of Germany's capital had cost the Red Army an estimated 78,000 men killed in action and over 274,000 wounded. In return, the Germans had lost some 90 to 100,000.
So, I guess they just pulled some of them back. I was like, what happened to the other, million that were missing?
1,000 men killed in action,
I guess
as
they
well
were just
as at
pulled
least
back.
another 200,000 wounded. During their advance into Germany, the vengeful Red Army had left a trail of pillage and destruction in its wake. An estimated 95,000 to 130,000 women in Berlin alone are said to have been sexually assaulted, of which 10,000 would later commit suicide.
That's what I'm talking about. Outside of cannibalism, it's the only undocumented, and if I'm not mistaken, it probably is not. Like I was saying, during the Battle of Stalingrad, I think there was some cannibalism. I have to go back and rewatch the video. But this is the worst. Full-on murder, treason, killing people within your own side, just pure frantic sexual assault. This war had literally the worst parts of human beings. So it's just so fascinating to study, to know what we're capable of. This was us. This is us. Not even 80 years ago. It's not even even the birth of America. When you talk about that, over 250 years ago, you're like, oh, that warfare was barbaric. What we did to the Native Americans was barbaric. This is worse. Way, way fucking worse.
Still, many Germans
insanity.
believed that the conflict was finally over, and that a semblance of normal human life was slowly returning under shared Allied Soviet occupation. However, the alliance between the two victors would prove short-lived, and the start of the Cold War would usher a new type of crisis in the city, which had suffered so much during the Second World War.
Hey man, big shouts out to the armchair historian, man. He never disappoints. Always coming through with the fire. But man, World War II is just so heavy. I never feel the same after a World War II documentary, after a video, after a podcast talking about it, whatever it is, anything on World War II, you just don't feel the same after. I feel disgusted. I feel intrigued. I feel, I don't know. I don't know how to describe it. I don't know how to put it into words, but this was it, man. This was the big one. The biggest war humanity has ever fought. That's been documented. I mean, pre-Youngest Dragon Ear Pact, who knows what we were up to before then. Maybe we were even worse. But I highly doubt it. And it's just so fascinating. If you were fascinated by this, like the video. Sub to the channel if you're new. Follow the channel for seeing us on Twitch. We do this not as often as I'd like. So we're going to start doing it more. We're going to be back on Friday. Maybe Saturday for One Piece. I got Fight Camp and a promotion event on Friday. So I may not stream Friday. Might have to wait till Saturday morning. But we're going to stream One Piece this weekend. So be here for that if you're a One Piece manga reader. If you like Solo Leveling, you like Blue Lock, you like anime. I think Mob Psycho had a new season. So once we finish Blue Lock, I might slide over to Mob Psycho. Always going to be pumping out great content. So if you like great content, follow the channel, sub to the channel. And I'll catch you on the flip side. Y'all be safe, y'all be easy. Peace out.